So picking up where we left off in step one of starting off our medical office example, something has just come to our attention. Wait, the boss just realized that we need to track the type of patient we have for billing purposes. Because you know what? Our doors are open to anybody that needs medical services, right? Not every patient that walks in the door is going to be a resident of Ontario, right? They may not have an OHIP number. They could be out of province, Canadian, or they could be an international person, right, who just coming for some medical services. And of course, the billing has got to be handled differently in all three of those cases. So, since there's only ever going to be those three cases, that's not going to change. A structure that I know you're familiar with that will really help us here is an enumeration. I'm going to put it in the models folder because it is part of our overall model. I'm going to add a class here. I'm going to call it coverage. And it's basically going to be an enumeration, right? So instead of a class, I can just change it this way though. Public enum coverage, and it's made up of three values. OHIP, either they're covered by OHIP, or they're out of province, or they're international. Those are the only three cases we'll ever have. So it's a good candidate to be an enumeration. Now, just a second though. Thinking about, again, the presenting values on the user interface itself. OHIP, that looks fine. International, not a problem there if that word appears on the screen. Out of province without spaces, that would look very unprofessional once again. Fortunately, even in an enumeration like this, we can use our data annotations. So I can say display name equals out of province. Nicely spaced out so it looks professional on the screen. Isn't that nice? Okay, so there's my coverage. Now, we're going to have to make some changes to our patient class then, right? So let's go over to the patient class. Open that up. Maybe I'll close this for now, free up some screen real estate. Okay, so coming down, maybe I'll put it after email address. By the way, you'll notice I do this. I never put anything above the primary key at the top, and I try to put anything new above the foreign key. There might be more than one foreign key, so all the foreign keys at the bottom, right? All right, other than that, I'm going to throw in my coverage here, right? So I'll just put that in place. So here, public coverage. Now it's an enumeration, but that's okay. Public coverage, okay? And it's required, error message, you must select the patient's health coverage, right? Okay, now our migration doesn't include this. We have modified our model, right? If I were to try and run or do anything like that, I'll actually get an error message telling me my model is out of sync, right? So I know right away that's going to be a problem. I have to make a new migration, right? So let's come up here. I'll open my common commands again. Actually, I don't even really need it because once I open the package manager console, I think I still have the built-in history of the commands. Yeah, they're still here, right? So I need to add a migration for my medical office context, okay? I don't have to, on subsequent migrations, you don't have to have this anymore. I can take that out, right? And then, because that will be understood. Once you've created the migration, subsequent ones on the same DB context always get put in the same folder. Name for it has to be unique though. This would give me an error message. In fact, I can show you that. It'll give me a message here because, I can't have two migrations already with the same name. So let me bring up that command again. Add coverage. Okay. All right, so now we can see here we're adding the column to patients, okay? And the down removes the column. You might scratch your head and say, well, what about the actual enumeration itself, right? Aren't we going to do something with it? The answer is no, we don't actually have the enumeration. It's not in the database itself, right? All that's stored there is the integer value to correspond to the enumeration. The enumeration just lives in our code. Okay, all right. Now, one of the things that you saw me do in our first demo with the masks the other day was actually use that tool, right? Went in and opened the table, edit top 200 rows, and typed a few seed values in. Again, because we often repeatedly have to delete the database and so on, we don't eventually want to have to manually provide seed data. Some of it is stuff we need all the time, and other seed data is really just so that we have something on the screen to look at, right? Oh, by the way, I do need to update the database here, right? Almost forgot. Okay, let me do that while we're talking. So that's good. We're updating the database, and you might say, hey, can we do that? Can we have 2 migrations in a row? Well, it depends. Because we were just adding new things, we didn't change any of the existing components of the overall database system itself yet. Any tables, any, we just added columns and things like that. Yes, we got away with it, right? So we have 2 migrations sequentially defined within our system, and away we go. And as long as you don't get an error message, you can keep on doing that. But eventually, I can tell you right now, we will run into problems and have to start a fresh set of migrations. But that's okay. We're going to carry on at this point in time. So, sorry, let me get back to seeding data, right? How are we going to go about that? Because we want to automate that process as well. Once more in the data folder, because it makes sense to organize it here, I'm going to add a class, right? I'm going to call my class Medical Office Initializer, right? It's like a superhero. He's my Medical Office Initializer. Yeah. Now he can be a static class. Here, see. I don't want to be gender prejudicial here, right? A static class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a static void method here, right? It's probably best if I just copy the whole thing, and that way I don't mess up here. So let me actually just even select this much and then paste. Okay, so what do we have? All right, so I have my initialize. I'm going to pass in the service provider. The service provider, okay, is basically our dependency injection system. So we can pull anything out of that system using the service provider, right? So that allows me here when I create my context, okay, to go into service provider, get the required service, okay, my DB context option, my medical office context, and that is my connection string. So that, okay, allows us to give that as to the constructor of the DB context, and away we go. Excellent. All right. Now a try-catch, always good to put things, anytime you actually interact with the database, in a try-catch, right? So I'm going to seed some data manually here, right? We can use something nice like this, add range. That allows us to add a range of new doctor objects. We can create them here with just comma-separated lists, basically, and then call save changes, and we add that whole range at once, right? Okay, notice we have it in an if, though, okay? We only do this if it's empty. There are no doctors there. Then we add the doctors. Then we're going to go on to patients. Ooh, let me stop and ask you, why is the order important? Well, think about it, right? We have a one-to-many relationship, okay? You cannot have, it's a required foreign key. In other words, you cannot create a patient unless you have a doctor to relate that patient back to. So we must seed the doctors first. When you start creating your own seed data, as you're going to have to do in your project work, I guarantee everyone will struggle with this, right? You think, okay, which entities do I have to seed first? But just remember how the different relationships, one to many, many to many, all the relationships and how they work, and always start sort of from the outside and work towards down the chain, right? Okay, so doctors first. Then, as long as I don't have any patients, I'll come in here. I can once more use add range. No, I'm just hard coding some values here, right? Not a problem. That's okay. I can do that, okay? And then there we go. So here, okay, we're going to go through providing everything. Now, notice that I am leaving out some information here and there because not everything is always required, right? This green underline, well, this is because the doctor ID, of course, is required. But what's happening over here is I have a link query, right? I'm going to the DB context, .doctors. This is using extension method syntax. .first or default, okay, where my lambda is basically showing you the where, right? The where clause, okay? And it's going to return the first or default if it can't find a matching one based on my where clause. That the first name is Gregory, the last name is House. Now, I wrote this, so I know that the doctor should be there, so it's really not a problem, right? The green underlying is really just saying deference of a possible null value. In other words, this could be null, right? So it's just a warning, okay? Now you can suppress these warnings if you want to. I usually leave them there because they kind of remind me to stop and think about things as I go on, but it is only a warning, so I'm going to carry on for now. Same idea with all 4 of these patients, then we call save changes. All right, so the only trick left really is to make sure we call this code. Where are we going to do that from? Well, right here in program.cs. Okay, remember we've so far worked with the builder, getting things added to our services, our dependency injection system and so on. Finally, we build the app. Then we go on to configure things like the environment for, the web and so on, the HTTP request pipeline, things like that, HTTPS redirection using routing, authorization, right, and so on and so forth. Ooh, this is a really good one to talk about for a moment. Map controller route. Okay, I know we touched on it before, but our default route is controller, action, then / optionally an ID number, right? So home controller, index, action, etc. Right? You remember we talked about that already. I want to just point it out again because it's so important that we're following that pattern. Okay, so I can put code as simple as something like this in place, right? Now we will add more logic to this later on as the app gets a bit more complicated, but basically just using our scope, okay, we're going to create a scope of services, getting our service provider, passing that here as we initialize the medical office initializer. And that gives it the ability to find the connection string as it creates our context and away it goes. So we're going to call initialize every time we run. There we go. Now, of course, the logic is there. If the data is already seeded, then it won't try to add it again. All right. Okay. So we're ready to actually create controllers. Yeah, I'll do that. Let's go right click. I'm just going to add the controllers themselves. MVC with entity framework. We'll just do them quickly here for the 2 doctor and patient entities we have. Just remember, as I've mentioned before, always get rid of the plural, right? The S here as we create the controller. Okay, good. So I'll just also add patient. The patient controller. Again, don't forget, remove the pluralization, the S here. And that'll just take a moment or two as well. Okay, so sorry, I've paused my recording. I forgot to start recording again. So I just made a couple little changes here. I don't want to undo them, so I'll just highlight what they are. Remember, we talked about this the other day. I find that with the later version of Bootstrap, I like to add a little bit of a bottom margin to every form group, every input control, so to speak. So that's a little change I made. And here in layout, okay, I just fixed where we needed spaces between the word medical and office on the screen. But also, the 2 links that were here for home index and home privacy, I stole them, right? Because we already have them here, right? Right at the very left in the nav bar at the top is the words medical office. And that also is set up ASP controller home action index, right? For privacy, right in the footer, we already had it. Right down here, controller home action privacy, right? So I just stole these ones for patient and doctor. Remember again, the controller name is actually in the singular form, even though we do show it in a plural form as the text on the link itself. So let's give her a try. I'll go to HTTP, drum roll as we run, and there we go, we're up, okay? I can go to patients, and there's my seeded data. Now, lots of improvements are needed. For one thing, look at doctor. We're only showing the first name here, right? If I go to edit a patient, even down here in the drop-down list, it's only showing the first name, right? Coverage, oh, there's nothing there, right? Our enumeration isn't even showing up and so on, okay? So yeah, definitely some issues in terms of the UI here. Create new, okay? The same idea here. We don't have it alphabetically sorted. We don't have the full names of the doctors showing. Things like that are going to be the next thing we'll focus on fixing as well, right? Okay, doctors, that's pretty straightforward. There's much less to do here, but notice this. This is, pretty reasonable, but there's a lot of separate columns here, right? Start thinking about making it responsive and, yeah, there's a lot of work done to make this look nice on a smaller screen, right? So that's something we'll talk about. Next is we're going to look at combining things like, hey, why not just, it's read only. Why not put the name together instead of having 3 separate columns? Oh, you know what? There's information on the screen here that is highly confidential for the patient, like the OHIP numbers, right? That's their billing. You shouldn't have that showing anywhere and everywhere, right? Even the date of birth, you probably wouldn't want to have that here. We might want to have that deeper in the system where we can have restrictions that only people with certain access can see that kind of thing and so on, okay? We could use some improvement to the formatting of the phone number here and some other things like that. All right. Well, let's stop and start the recording at this point. We're going to go on with our next part shortly.